All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the January 12th, 2021 iteration of the SIG Windows meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, so please adhere by all of the CNCF code of conduct. All right, let's get started. First, we have a couple of announcements related to the 121 release planning. Previously, the release leads would spend a great deal of effort just checking in with all of the SIGs and all of the users or contributors to figure out what enhancements were going to be delivered for that milestone. And for 121, they're changing that up a little bit, and they are asking that all of the SIGs kind of notify the release team about which enhancements they plan on delivering, and also providing status updates for that. So if anybody, we can continue to work on this in the next couple of meetings, but if anyone is planning on advancing any KEPs that we're not currently aware of, please bring that to attention of me or any of the tech leads here, just to make sure that we can get all of those tracked for the 121 release. And in a similar note, the proposed enhancement freeze for 121 will be February 9th. The exact dates and all of the milestones for the 121 release are still kind of in flux, but in the KDEV discussion article that I linked is the current proposals. So if anybody has any questions, either just reply to that or feel free to reach out to us. Does anybody have any other kind of questions about the 121 release? If not, we can go into just get started with the agenda. All right, I'll take that as a no. So first item on the agenda is a carryover item from last week, where we were going to discuss a little bit of differences between how the CNI plugins operate with Containerd on Windows versus Docker so far. James, are you here? Do you want to kick this off, or should I?
Yeah, you can go ahead. I think then we can dive into like the CAPI side of things.
Okay. So a little bit of background context for that is with the way that the SIG Windows testing or SIG Windows tool repository is kind of set up for the kubeadm and cluster provisioning demos. They use there's a little bit of a workflow where Wins gets installed on the machines, and then different containers bring in CNIs and execute any CNI daemons that are needed on the node through Wins. And that works with Docker because apparently Docker shim has support for a kind of a pseudo host network support on Windows nodes, where Docker shim is configured in clusters where if the pod spec has host network set to true, then it will attach those pods to a Docker network on the machine named host, which is configured as part of the default Docker install. So that kind of works out of the box. So that's how you get this pseudo host network support on Windows. With Containerd, that doesn't happen at all. And there's actually code paths in Containerd that say pretty much ignore the host network field on the CRI calls that get passed in. And so that is kind of leading it into a little bit of difficulty in getting that same behavior where you can bring the CNI plugins and configs in via a pod when you're running with Containerd. We believe that we'll be able to address that when we have privileged container support, which we hope to kind of progress in the 121 milestone. But for the current kind of efforts in CAPZ to support Containerd, we think we may need an alternate approach here and not rely on Wins and that basic host network support to get set up. So we wanted to have an open discussion about what to do there. One option, or I think one of the most straightforward options to get this to work, is just to configure and run any CNI daemons that need to be run. Configure that during the image build time, so they will just kind of so the CNI will be configured as the nodes come up, and not wait on that to work. This has a little bit of a downside in that, and you can't just upgrade or swap out the CNIs on the nodes via, up deployments. You would actually need to either log into the node or just bring up a new node. I think this also has an added kind of downside of each image in Cluster API would potentially only support one CNI. So if you, so any providers that wanted to support multiple CNIs would potentially need to create multiple images with that. Is there anything else before we kick off kind of the discussions with that, James?
No, I think that's pretty good. Oh, sorry. I think Perry has been installing Containerd on their side of the world. Sorry, go ahead.
I think our events too.
Yeah, no worries, James. I just wanted to mention to Mark that the approach that he mentioned is sort of what we're doing with our operator. When the node comes up is when we configure CNI. But you're right, it has all the downsides that you mentioned. But we have not had too many customers complain yet, but I'm thinking that might happen in the future. So, but it's been working well for us, is all I'm trying to say. That's it.
Yeah, and that's the same approach that we take with AKS currently, is the CNI kind of just comes up with the node and we actually run kube proxy just as a service on the node as well. We don't run that as a container. And that's working for us, like you mentioned. It's working for you as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. We run everything as services. We don't run any container, any Windows containers, because we have other restrictions on our side. So yeah, we're running everything as services, and it's been working well so far.
So Mark, you said this won't support the 2 CNIs though, right?
I mean, you could always build an image that has both CNI, or like that has multiple CNIs baked into it. It's just, you might kind of get a matrix explosion when you look at all of the different CNIs that you wanted to support.
I see. So the reason I'm saying is for AKS, for example, Azure CNI, and then we have as everybody knows, there is demand for Calico, like network policy and stuff, and then Ontria, and if they cannot work together, I think that's going to be a huge blocker for everyone in Kubernetes community. I don't know what everybody else thinks.
So I've been experimenting with using the post kubeadm actions as part of the cluster spec in Cluster API to run the sort of required steps after the join, and that's been working okay. I mean, I'm still struggling with some of the new Containerd APIs, and we're still going through that, but that kind of works okay because it gives you a way of being able to set like a startup script, which allows you to start doing any sort of reboots and startups, and I find that cloud-based in it kind of it's quite resilient to restarts, because once it's done a step, it kind of knows that it's done a step and then it continues on. So I've been finding that even reboots have been okay and setting things up. So that was kind of where I've been aiming at.
So I think that all, like for short-term options, it sounds like installing it on the node is the way to go. Maybe even using the post kubeadm if you're in CAPI to do those installs. Long term, do we think that the way that we want to do this is via privileged containers, or are we going to continue to do all these installs up front? I think that's kind of one of the open questions here.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons, and this might be similar for OpenShift, that AKS isn't using the model that the SIG Windows tools uses is because of wins and the potential security implications for that. I think that privileged containers are obviously going to bring in another kind of set of security concerns, but they wouldn't have the same set of concerns as just leaving the Win service running on the host, which can potentially allow anybody who has access to that named pipe to, just do a lot of things on the host. So I think that I actually don't have a very strong opinion right now about which way to take this in the future. As Muzz mentioned, though, as clusters get more advanced and users do want to have multiple CNIs running, it might be easier to manage it by switching back to bringing the CNIs in via a pod.
Is there a basic set of CNI commands that suggest a CNI proxy type implementation for NetSH and whatever else needs to be run?
Not exactly. So a lot of the CNIs have a daemon that needs to run on the host, like FinalD and Calico has one as well. And I think that's where the benefit of bringing this in as a pod will kind of start to shine, is that you can run that as a service and it'll run on the host. Today, when we try and go through this workflow and run those in the pod in SIG Windows via the SIG Windows tools route, what ends up happening is the pod gets connected to a NAT network, and then network traffic from outside of the pod, like a host local NAT network, and then traffic from outside of the pod, but inside of the cluster doesn't get routed to that daemon service that's running correctly. So then the daemon service doesn't know how to fix up all of the routes on the node. And I think that each CNI, even though CNI has that interface with how you execute the plugins, I'm not sure that each one of those daemons would have a set of operations.
Yeah, in Intria, we have a lot of wrappers to OVS and stuff that are totally irrelevant to what the Calico folks are doing. So I agree with you. It's not, but it feels like it would be like architecturally nice if we could have some middle ground between everything is just a service and everything is a pod, like the way we have with CSI proxy, but I just don't know what that would look like.
Yeah, I think that would definitely warrant a little bit of further investigation, though. It's a good idea.
So if I can pitch it from the AKSHI perspective, there's a huge interest on my end in having everything as a pod, mostly to have the same patterns as for Linux, especially when it's the matter of upgrading. It's so much easier on Linux than it is on Windows when you're running as a service. There's also a few things that happen, is that synchronization when you boot or reboot a machine between the services is much more complicated if it's not in a pod. So there are a lot of caveats, a lot of workarounds that we're using today when we're running everything as a service. But these workarounds are necessary. But in the long term, I really hope that privileged containers on Windows will be able to have the similar experience as what we have on Linux.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. I think that there are the Windows nodes that we have to manage in AKS are a bit more hands-on than some of the Linux nodes as well. So that
can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Going back a few minutes, so it's not clear to me what the blocker is to getting this working. Is it that we need something else in containerd and we need privileged containers? Are there two things preventing us from achieving this, or am I misunderstanding?
So in cluster API, there is an assumption that the CNI plugins and config will come in through a pod, and that's where the blocker is. But just in terms of running and setting up clusters outside of cluster API, there's no blockers. And as we've mentioned, OpenShift and AKSR, just configuring the CNI as part of node setup, and that is working out for us. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like you said, it's in the cluster API is where the blocker is, which is probably why I don't understand, because I have not spent any time on that.
Yeah, and the workaround for that is to just use the post-ADM commands so that you can do it like Perry and the folks over at in VMware are doing. So.
Can I also add another point? Something that is related, and privileged containers usually I mean, it's useful for demand set, is actually the host networking. Basically, at the moment, host networking, we're using a lot of workarounds. For example, I think the official workaround that we recommend is to create a NAT network for the host network on Windows. But internally in HNS, host networking is implemented for Windows Server containers. Normally, Containerd, there's a few changes to be made in Containerd to even support this. That will be super useful for privileged containers. I can definitely help. I don't know if I'll have cycles to actually do the work, but I can definitely help guiding someone who has cycles. I'll try to find someone, but I can definitely drive on what work needs to be done.
That would be great. Yeah, we're working on finishing all of the updates for the privileged container kept to move that, hopefully move that into implementable in 121. And that should be done by hopefully this week. And we did call out how host network is handled differently in Containerd for Windows versus Linux. I will make sure that you're pinged on the PR and can comment on that and help direct that.
Yes, please. Is
there
any meeting I can attend also to help there, at least from a guidance perspective?
I don't think we have any meetings scheduled right now, but we can certainly set one up later on in this week. We can work on doing that in Slack. That would be helpful for folks.
Quick
Sounds great.
technical question on the Containerd stuff before we jump off it. Rui over on our side was working on reordering the CNI, CRI steps in Containerd so that it works better for Antrea. I recall that, and so now I'm kind of confused. I always thought you always created a container first, then because that's necessary in Linux at least, right? You have to attach a network namespace to a running process. But in Windows, does it work differently on the Containerd side? Like, do you create a process? Like, is there any problem in Windows fundamentally of creating a process before you call the CNI? Like, is the ordering supposed to be reversed, or?
Is that so? In Windows now, I think the CNI is always called before the creating the container as well. But I think the confusion is that in relation to the thread that is going on about the VNIC and the VNIC creation time, or is that a different question?
I don't remember that thread. I will just, you know what, we can, so that we don't take up the whole meeting, I will just give you the link, Jocelyn. And if you dig in there, 4921, you'll see, you'll see what we see on our end. I mean, on our end, it's just that it's like, we're just thinking of it selfishly, but I don't know if other people have had the same issue, but for us, we just want that call to always happen after this.
It is, so I can, if I can steal a few minutes, I'll try to be quick. But yeah, it's the thread that I was thinking about. There's actually multiple threads on the same topic. I was hoping that Keith would reply to it because that's more of a design decision that needs to be done. I used to work in this area before, but I don't own it anymore. So that's why I'm a little bit silent on it. But typically what's happening is that when you're in the container world, we don't talk about VNX. We don't talk about switches. We talk about networks and endpoints. Internally, these networks and endpoints are creating these switches and VNX. The thing is, it's not really designed originally to be visible to the end customer. So basically, the scenario that you're describing is kind of going beyond what HNS was designed for originally. And it's kind of using the internals of what HNS does and try to plug into these internals. So that's what makes the answer to the question very difficult. Because the endpoint is definitely created first, but the problem is the VNIC is not. Because there's a difference in time between when the endpoint is created and when the VNIC is created. Because we don't expect people to actually know about when the VNIC is created. But in your case, it's what you're interested in.
Yeah, that's the, yeah. Okay, so
So
that's
the step forward is I'm trying to get an answer from Keith about it and the guidance from Keith, because he owns that. And if we are trying to give some information about the internals of HNS, we need to have tests also on our end to make sure that in the long term it still works.
I don't know who Heath is, but
Keith is actually Microsoft's lead that owns the host networking service.
okay, cool.
So we can take the conversation on Slack, and I can point you to I'll add you to the also Slack thread that we have, and Keith is there on that Slack thread.
Cool. Okay, so if you talk to Heath, Keith, if you could forward him that issue as well, so we could just, even if we have to close it.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Sorry for taking up all the time. Okay, next.
Yeah.
So
no, I think these are good discussions. Oh, sorry, James, did you have something?
No, I was just going to quickly summarize the conversation, maybe. It sounds like for now, installing the CNI, especially Containerd up front, is the way to go. And with inside CAPI, we can do that via post kube8am commands. That way, it's still like if somebody wants to do a different one, they can use a different CNI and configure it that way. And then as privileged containers come on, we'll look at using that as a CNI option moving forward.
Yep, that was my takeaway from the conversation as well. Sounds good. All right, we have a couple minutes left for the next topic, which is also CNI related. James or Jay, I see some DNS, some topic around DNS and CNI. You wanna?
Yeah, I mean,
take it away?
James, feel free to interrupt me at any point here. So so the biggest priority for me right now is making sure that we've got parity in TKG with other Windows deployments and so on and so forth. And so I've been going through the end-to-ends, and I appreciate everybody helping to field the things I've been putting up. I feel like the issue I hit that was a sticking one is I was doing an A/B test between Calico on EKS and Azure. And well, congratulations, Azure folks. You definitely seem to win on that one. But I think in Entree, we also are going to be missing this functionality. I'm not sure yet. Perry, I'm going to test on one of Perry's clusters. He's in the middle of hacking some stuff right now. But I feel like this DNS config thing is up in the air, and it's really up in the air outside of the boundaries of this. It's a fractal problem because it seems like there's not any real community consensus all the way up to the CNI folks in terms of who the hell owns DNS, right? So like right now, I guess there's a trick going on in the CNI stuff. This is the stuff that James worked on. He knows it better than I do, but in Azure, y'all are, I guess, sending a DNS input into your CNI and then like regurgitating that into the CRI, and then it gets plumbed in as a Windows native DNS record or something, or DNS server record. Is that the basic idea? So we just kind of like Trojan horse some DNS information through the CNI.
Yeah. So the way it worked was this is before Containerd was around. So if you look at the Docker shim, the way Docker shim does this is they plumb it into resolve conf. And for Windows, we didn't have that capability. So we went through the CNI capabilities. And so we pass that through the runtime, and then the runtime looks it up, and it essentially plumbs it into the container. So, and I linked to one for the Containerd as well. I think Containerd does the same thing as they pass it on to the CNI.
The Containerd Windows stuff, yeah.
Yep.
And then one, I think, wrinkle in this is David Schott, I think, mentioned that there's a proposal to remove that DNS functionality or being able to do those workarounds from the CNI interface spec in future things. So
yeah, so I put an email on SIG Network yesterday asking some folks about this, and Casey Calandero, who he's one of the CNI spec owners, he said, well, we were just talking about removing all that. And I was like, oh, okay. Right. Well, like, so I guess I'm happy to, so I work a lot in SIG Network, and I have been for a while. So I'm happy to represent us there. I'm just trying to figure out what exactly should we be, what exactly is our goal here? Is our goal to just have them indefinitely keep that DNS? It's a DNS, it's a CNI configuration field, right? That's the DNS field that we actually use, right? We use it on the CNI configuration is the thing that's in the spec, and the output is just arbitrary, right? That's not in the spec, right?
I believe so.
It's kind of confusing when you look at the spec because it says it's a configuration field, and I was like, sounds like it's more like a dynamic input that's sent per container though, right? That was one thing I was confused about.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that. I'm not sure of the specifics.
Okay. Anyway,
Um,
the only other thing I got is the DNS config test. I'm in the process of like plumbing in something a little bit more fine grained than what we have. Doing something like potentially, I was just hacking on it with Carter a little while ago, maybe just checking to see if. And one quick question, James, is the NS, the AGN host records don't have that resolve DNS PowerShell command. So we do have dig and we do have NS lookup. So is there any one of those that you would prefer, or do you want? If you want, I can try to get the AGN host containers to package up the DNS resolve command.
No, I think NS lookup should work. I just know that it's generally recommended to stay away from NS lookup on Windows because it doesn't use the native DNS lookup. So if it's working, I think it's probably okay, but I don't know if anybody from the networking team can chime in further on that, but.
I did feel like I saw some discrepancies as well, but yeah, okay. I'll dig into the details and make sure it works.
I've seen things where like if you use resolve conf, the DNS resolves immediately, but if you use NS lookup, it takes a few seconds for when the container boots up.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'll work that out. I should have a PR up for that pretty soon. And that's it. Okay, I've taken up all the time. So we're a minute over, I guess.
Yeah, we can always come back to this as things develop. Does anybody have any other topics they'd like to bring up quickly, or should we end the meeting?
Hey, Mark, really quickly. So the PR to change the leadership should go in today. The lazy consensus is over. Nobody brought any objections. So we should be able to get all the changes. In the Kubernetes SIG repo, I already made all the changes with all the tech leads. So Jay, Deep, and James, and I PR'd myself out. So the last one remaining is this one. So it should be able to go in today.
Awesome, thanks, and best of luck with your future endeavors, Michael.
Thanks, everybody. I'll monitor you guys from afar, and best of you guys are all doing a great job, and I look forward to seeing more advancements in Windows.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Also,
Bye.
Thank you very much, James, for taking notes during the meeting. It's very much appreciated.
Tried.
Yep. All right, I guess that's it. We'll see you guys all next week, and I will reach out on Slack about setting up a meeting for anybody who's interested with Containerd and host network support on Windows. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.